and I hope to be able to say that for a long time, as long as I can. But I joined the town in December, and I don't think we had coyotes back in December, so I'm not sure what happened. So I guess this is my fault. So they came from sea. You got to watch out about Sarasota. So this is interesting to me that we've had just a series of sightings in a relatively short period of time, and I know I've had the pleasure to learn a little bit more about coyotes than I've known in the past. And one of the questions I had when we were talking to some of the experts is, well, how do they get to Longboat? And I've learned that, we're not alone. In fact, someone said to me, well, you're very fortunate you haven't had any before, because they've been everywhere else but here. And so we're trying to learn as much as we can about it. We know it's really important to the community, and we know there's a number of questions out there about coyotes, and if you see one, what should you do, and why are they here, and what do you do about it? And so we're really pleased to host today the FWC, the state agency that's really responsible for and has a lot of expertise related to coyotes. And the purpose of us hosting this is so that you have an opportunity to hear directly from them and can ask them questions. And I know they're going to present some information to you, but they'll also be here after that to talk, even on an individual basis, about the services they provide and other more detailed, specific questions. So I'm very grateful that you're here. I'm glad we could host this as we all try to figure out how do we deal with what we're experiencing here on Longboat with these recent sightings. And so I'm going to quickly get out of the way and turn it over to the FWC and let them pick it up from here. And so we have with us the regional director, Tom Drake, and he's going to take it from here and also introduce some of his team that he brought with him today. So thank you for coming.
Thanks. So we made it easy with both Toms. Easy to remember. Again, welcome. Thank you guys for coming out. I'm going to do a quick little introduction of who I brought and what we're going to talk about, what this afternoon will look like, and I'm going to get out of the way and let the experts take over in coyotes. I would like to take just a quick minute to recognize some of the folks that we brought with us and tell you a little bit about FWC. It's a pretty diverse organization. So we have Angeline, our wildlife assistance biologist, Rhonda, wildlife assistance biologist, Melody Kilborn, our public information coordinator. We also have two of our staff members, Captain Carpenter from law enforcement in Fort Myers, and Lieutenant Gerken, who I believe is an area lieutenant. FWC is a pretty big organization, headquartered out of Tallahassee. We have constitutional authority over fish and wildlife in the state of Florida, and we work with other agencies like DEP, water management districts, and we also coordinate with federal agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA, the National Fisheries Service. As far as FWC itself, a version of FWC, or Game and Fish, has been around since, I believe, the 30s in the state of Florida. And the traditional roles like hunting and fishing, and as times and things change, we took on a lot more roles. There's 6 different divisions, like hunting and game, like law enforcement, like marine fish, like freshwater fish. We have offices all around the 67 counties of the state. We are a commission, and we have this really long name, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and we like to go with FWC. It makes it easy to remember. It's on the back of law enforcement shirts, on the back of our research boats. And we have a governor appointed executive director and 7 commissioners appointed by the governor. They sit 5-year terms, and then we have 5 meetings a year, big public meetings, where we discuss fish and wildlife issues. And those are meetings that are open to the public, and they cover everything from hunting and fishing rules to all kinds of other things, up to and including coyotes. One of the big things that we do is on the ground participation in public meetings like this. So we're in the Southwest region. I'm the regional director. We have Fernando, Pasco, all the way down to Lee, over to Islands and back up to Polk. And then I have 4 other counterparts that have a similar number of counties around the state. And each of us have in our office regional biologists for things like coyotes, which we say sort of people-wildlife interaction or management of those types of situations. That's a really brief overview of an organization with, including part-time folks, of about 3,000 people scattered all over the entire state, doing all kinds of things for fish and wildlife. what we like to do this afternoon is focus in on coyotes, all things coyotes, where do they come from, why are they here, maybe how did they get here, maybe, but a little dive into biology that I think you'll appreciate with some good graphs and pictures, and then an opportunity after about 45 minutes or so to meet with us directly out back in front of some other displays and ask your questions specifically. We can go through those types of things. So we'll probably go here for 45 minutes, something like that. We'll take a quick break. We'll reconvene the staff out back. We plan to be here till 3 o'clock. So we'll answer coyote questions, and when we found that one-on-one works really well to get questions answered. And we also found that a lot of people, in many cases, ask one question, which generates another question, and the person standing next to them, that's a good question. We have law enforcement here if you have other questions. I know there's a lot of voting in the area, and we cover all of that as well. So, having said all that, let me get out of the way and bring Angelina up.
If that one doesn't work well.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Great. So once again, my name is Angeline Scotton. I'm a wildlife biologist with FWC. One of the duties that I'm tasked with is assisting the public with conflict wildlife issues. Pretty much any species you can think of, with the exception of alligators. There's a whole other part of the agency that handles them. My staff and I talk to the public on a daily basis and try to help resolve those issues. Our number one issue with the species is bears. Number two, not a far back, number two is coyotes. And in this part of the state, we're talking to the public more about coyotes than we are talking about any other species. So today, I have a presentation I'm going to present to you. We're going to go all through a lot of dynamics about coyotes. You're going to notice there's a theme to this, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So you'll see that theme as we roll through the presentation. And this presentation was produced by Dr. Marty Main out of the University of Florida. He's one of the leading coyote researchers in the state. And so we'll go ahead and get right into it. One of the first questions we get about coyotes is, why are they here? They didn't used to be in Florida. And that's true. When the colonists came to Florida, when the Spanish came in the 16th century or so, there were no coyotes here, but there were red wolves. With the extirpation of red wolves in Florida, that's one of the reasons that allowed coyotes to move into the state. Red wolves were extirpated or removed completely from the state of Florida in the 1920s. Coyotes historically had a smaller range out in the western U.S. Gray wolves are also a part of this story. Even though gray wolves were not present in Florida, gray wolf populations were decimated out west. They were historically persecuted just as the red wolves were. The decline in gray wolf populations correlates to coyotes because gray wolves compete with coyotes and they predate on coyotes. So as the gray wolf population plummeted out west and the red wolf population was completely removed out of Florida and throughout most of its natural range, this started allowing coyotes to move from the western U.S. to the eastern U.S. Another reason or another aid for coyotes that helped move from west to east is our conversion to an agricultural landscape, especially around the Mississippi River Delta. Scenes like this are what coyotes like. Big open fields, pastures, meadows, and as we started converting to ag, this also started allowing coyotes to move from the western U.S. to the eastern U.S. Today, coyotes are found in every state in the continental U.S. and as far north as Alaska. So they've expanded their range tremendously from where they used to be. I will say that there is some fossil evidence that suggests coyotes were in Florida about 12,000 years ago and for some reason left the state. So we're not sure why they were gone. It's possible red wolves outcompeted them and forced them to move west, but it does appear that coyotes were here way back when. So looking a little bit into the history of their spread, specifically into Florida, the first sightings came in from the Panhandle around the 60s and 70s. But the first research study that started looking for coyotes in Florida was by Brady and Campbell in 1983, and they recorded coyotes in all of the counties shaded in green. So I want you to notice the counties in the center there. That's Orange and Lake County. That's the Orlando metropolitan area. So coyotes have been around Orlando for about 30 years now. The next research study was done by Woody and Hardesky in 1990, and they recorded coyotes in all of these counties. So by now, they've gone all the way and been recorded as far south as Collier, and they're moving closer to Tampa Bay. Scent survey data done by Dr. Marty Main confirmed coyotes in Sarasota County in 97 and 99. Carcass data done by Dr. Main confirmed coyotes in Pasco here on the West Coast. And finally, personal communication with Dr. Main and with FWC confirmed coyotes in all 67 counties in the state. Their most southern observation was in Key Largo in 2011. So there's something important about Key Largo, besides it's an island. I'll go to that in a second. The largest feral cat colony in the state is in Key Largo. So big guess why the coyotes are showing up there. Also, again, Key Largo is an island, kind of like Longboat Key. So how did the coyotes get there? They did one of two things. They either used the highways and the bridges, and we know they'll do that, or they swam. This is a photo that was recently submitted to us from the east side of the state in the Lake Worth Lagoon. And look how far out that coyote is. There's a channel marker out there behind him. So he's way out there. So not only have coyotes been recorded in Key Largo, they're on Sanibel and Captiva, they've been recorded on Siesta Key, Gasparilla, and even on Terra Verde and some of the smaller islands in Pinellas County. So they can show up on these barrier islands frequently and easily. So I want to go over some coyote biology with you. I don't want to bore you so much with biology, but it's important to know a little bit about coyotes to know what they're doing here on Longboat Key. Coyotes are omnivorous, meaning they're going to eat just about anything, and I'll go back to that in a moment. They're highly adaptable. This is one of the most intelligent wildlife species that we have in this area. Adult coyotes range between 25 and 40 pounds in weight. Home range size is variable. In an in a natural environment, let's start with that. In a natural environment, think East Polk County where there's a lot of ranch land. They're going to have a territory of about 15 square miles per animal. In an urban area, their territory size is going to shrink to about 3 square miles. The reason why their territory shrinks is because where there's more people, there's more food for coyotes, and they don't need to have such a big territory. They can find everything they need in a small space. So their territory sizes will shrink in those urban areas. Coyotes mate in the winter. They have pups in the spring. Litter size is on average 6, but this is variable too. This is dependent on food. The more food that's available to them, the more offspring they can have. They can have as many as 12 per litter if there's a lot of food available to them. If there's not as much food available to them, they may only have 2 or 3 pups that year. Both parents care for the young, and unlike dogs, coyotes are monogamous. They mate for life. They have very strong pair bonds. The male is absolutely involved in raising the young pups. Unlike dogs, where they're not monogamous at all and the male has no parental responsibilities, the male coyote is there and is heavily engaged in rearing the pups with the female. FWC just recently finished up a diet study of coyotes in Florida, and I mentioned earlier they're omnivorous and they'll eat almost anything, but we were curious on what was sustaining them in the state of Florida. This pie graph is showing you some gut contents, actual things we've found in coyote stomach contents during the study. And this is about 90 coyotes that were in this part of the study with the preliminary results. So not surprisingly, 31% of their diet is comprised of mammals, rats, mice, rabbits, things like that. Vegetation was kind of high, and you'll see mast in there too. That's things like acorns or blackberries, soft mast. But what I want to point out to you is just above the mast portion of the graph that says anthropogenic. That's human-related food sources. That's at almost 10%. That was stunning to us. We did not expect to find such a high amount of human-related foods inside those coyotes. Now the next couple of photos I'm going to show you, or next couple slides I'm going to show you, are photos of things that we found within coyotes' guts. I realize it's around lunchtime. So the good news is these photos aren't that graphic. If you're queasy, you might want to look away, but they're not bad, I promise. I wouldn't do that to you. So for the first photo I'm going to show you is dog food. This is from a coyote that was trapped in Pensacola. So dog food is very telling. This is a primary reason why coyotes are coming into urban areas. Dog food is high in calories, and the coyote doesn't have to work hard for it. All he has to do is walk up to a bowl of food. This is why they're coming into urban areas, when they can get easy food like this. The second photo is from a coyote that was hit by a car in Pinellas County, and I want you to notice that it has cooked chicken in its system. Yeah, cooked chicken. How did he get that? Did somebody feed him? Did somebody throw some leftover spoiled chicken over their fence? Did he get into some garbage? Not sure, but this is another main reason why they're coming into urban environments. And notice Pinellas County. FWC gets more calls about coyotes from Pinellas County than we do anywhere else in the state. If coyotes can survive in St. Pete and in Clearwater, they can survive really anywhere. Okay, next photo. This is a photo of a stomach of a coyote, and I want you to notice what color it is. It's purple. It's really odd. We think this coyote was eating pokeweed. It's a native weedy plant that has bright purple berries on it. It's about yay high. It's important for songbirds when they migrate. This coyote, we think, was eating so much of that plant that it stained its stomach purple. So this was some of the vegetation in that pie graph I showed you that we were kind of surprised to see. Next photo is of a McDonald's wrapper. And look where this was from. This coyote was hit by a car in the Ocala National Forest. That's a pretty rural piece of public land. How exactly did the coyote get that? Did somebody bring garbage into the National Forest? Does he leave and go to McDonald's and hit the dumpsters every day? Hard to say, but this was quite stunning for us to see as well. I think I have just a couple photos left. Here's a mini eggs wrapper. And this is also from another piece of public land, St. Joseph Peninsula State Park. So these are some of those anthropogenic things that drive coyotes into urban areas, and this is why their territory shrinks. If they can get food like this, they don't need to patrol such a large area. This is probably my favorite photo from the study. This is a total of 47 small mammals that were found in the stomach of one coyote. These all look like mice to me. They're all whole. I want to point out it takes a coyote about 5 hours to digest its meal. So this one coyote ate almost 50 mice in the 5 hours before its death. That's incredible. If only we could teach them just to do that. Just to go after the rodents, maybe they wouldn't be so bad. But this was an incredible find. And finally, the last photo. This is a substantial amount of insects, and I don't know if you can read what's on the card there in parentheses. That says roaches. Yeah, I'm not a fan of roaches at all, but this coyote ate quite a lot of roaches. So this kind of gives you an idea of just how eclectic and how broad their diet is. Now, each of those coyotes that came into our diet study was weighed. And so this graph is showing you the actual weights of those coyotes that came into this study. They're averaging, per this study, about 27 pounds. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because we consistently get phone calls from the public, and they're telling us we're seeing 60, 70, and 80-pound coyotes. And right now, we're just not seeing that correlate across the state. Coyotes do a really good job of making themselves look larger than they are. They're long-legged, they're tall, especially if they shed, they can look bushier and look larger than they are. Trust me, if you're seeing a 60 or 70 or 80-pound canid in your environment or in your community, you're seeing somebody's dog 9 times out of 10. If it's really a coyote, call me. That would be probably the world record coyote. But I wanted to give you this to show you coyotes are averaging in Florida about the size of a mid-sized dog. Again, they're averaging about 27 pounds. Okay, so what's good about them? Is there anything good about them? Well, certainly one good thing about coyotes is their aesthetic value. And if you can catch a scene like this, where a coyote is tending its pups at the den, this is rather endearing. We know that people come to Florida either to visit or to live here just for our wildlife viewing opportunities. And some people really love to see scenes like this. Some folks also really like to hear coyotes howling at night. It reminds them of being out west or being in touch with nature. Some people really don't, but others really do. And so there's an aesthetic value to coyotes that go with that. Another potentially good thing about coyotes is their control of smaller predators. So I mentioned earlier that the red wolf used to be in Florida and was gone in the 1920s. So Florida's been without a mid-level canine predator for just under 100 years. Some scientists think that coyotes are filling the role that the red wolf left behind, and they're acting as that mid-level canine predator and providing more ecological balance to the ecosystem by predating on some of those small mammals that don't have a mid-level predator, like opossums, like raccoons, like rats and mice. The reason or where this comes into play and is important, let's go with raccoons for a moment. You can have as many as 25 raccoons per square mile in some cases. And raccoons are really efficient nest predators. That's their thing. They are really good at finding nests. Coyotes are really good at finding raccoons. If coyotes are helping to control the raccoon population, they're indirectly helping some of our endangered and threatened bird species, like wood stork, like bobwhite quail, like some of those migrating songbirds. Now, this doesn't mean that if a coyote came across a bobwhite quail nest that he wouldn't eat it. He'd totally eat it. But they're not looking for the quail, for example, like they are looking for the raccoons. So because of this, some scientists think, again, that coyotes are providing a more ecologically balanced ecosystem in Florida. All right, so what about the bad? Is there anything bad about coyotes? Well, one potentially bad thing is their competition with native predators, like the Florida panther. Florida panther is on the endangered species list. Their population was in decline in the early 90s, and that's right around the time when coyotes started moving south into Florida. Coyotes and panthers like to eat the same things. They both like to eat deer, and they both like to eat hogs. However, coyotes tend to eat young deer and young hogs, while panthers tend to eat adult deer and adult hogs. We also know panthers and coyotes typically live in different places. Coyotes like those big open fields and pastures. Panthers like dense forest, and they don't really like to be around humans. We also know, if given the opportunity, a panther would probably kill a coyote. Mountain lions, similar species to panthers out west, are known for killing and eating, consuming coyotes out west. And finally, even though the panther is an endangered species, their population has been slowly increasing the last 20 years or so. Actually, it might be longer than that, more like 30 years. If coyotes were negatively impacting panthers, we should see the panther population declining, and instead we're starting to see it incline. Based on that, we don't think coyotes are negatively impacting panthers at this time. But what about the other native cat, the bobcat? Bobcats are about the same size as coyotes. They live in the same environments, and they definitely eat the same things coyotes are eating. So Dr. Marty May with the University of Florida tried to answer that question. He put radio collars on both bobcats and coyotes out in the Avon Park bombing range in Highlands County and in Polk County. Ooh, start the rain. So what you see from this map are coyote home ranges and bobcat home ranges. Bobcats are in red, coyotes are in blue. I want you to notice that they're overlapping with each other, so that's suggesting that both predators are existing in the same environment. But where you see the filled in areas, like the dotted area on the left side of the screen, kind of lower, that's representing a coyote's den site. And where you see the striped in areas in red, that's representing a bobcat's den site. So what we can take away from this is that bobcats and coyotes are coexisting with one another, but their denning sites are not overlapping with each other. In some cases, they're butting right up to one another, but they're not overlapping. So coyotes and bobcats out in this part of Florida, they're living with each other. They're not driving each other out. They're reproducing in the same space, and they're both able to live out there. Now, there's been no studies that I'm aware of to address this in urban areas, how bobcats and coyotes might be impacting each other. However, one of my staff recently put some trail cameras out in Hillsborough County. We were trying to determine what was eating a man's domestic turkeys. And on this trail camera, we got a bobcat and a coyote on the same camera on the same evening. So this is suggesting that they're living in the same areas, even in urban spaces with each other, and they're coexisting. This is very anecdotal, but I wanted to throw this in that we have some evidence that maybe they're coexisting the same way they are in more rural parts of Florida. Another potentially bad thing about coyotes is their predation of rare and endangered species. And I just mentioned a few minutes ago that coyotes can help some rare and endangered species. They can also hurt some others, especially ground nesting species, like indigo snakes, like burrowing owls, like beach nesting mice, and a couple species that are not represented on this slide are sea turtles and shorebirds. Some sea turtles and shorebirds can take a big hit from coyotes. And I will say, typically when coyotes start predating sea turtles and shorebirds, it's a learned behavior. They learn how to do it, and not every coyote will perform that behavior. But where on the beaches where you have seabirds and shorebirds, or sea turtles and shorebirds, one of the biggest predators out there are raccoons. And coyotes, we know, are helping to control those raccoon populations. On some beaches where coyotes are negatively impacting sea turtles and shorebirds, some management efforts have gone into play to help remove those individuals. All right, so what about the ugly? What's ugly about coyotes? The ugly part is certainly the human conflicts, and that's what I'm guessing brought most of you out here this afternoon to talk about. And this is what I'm going to focus on for the rest of the presentation. Before I dive in too much into the human conflicts, though, I will say, in my opinion, I think they have an undeserved public reputation, and I think that's being driven by some myths and misconceptions about coyotes. One is their size, and we talked about that a few moments ago, that they look larger than they are, and I think folks think they're bigger than they are, but they're about average size, mid-sized dog. Another myth or misconception is pack. I don't like to use the word packs when I talk about coyotes. When I think of pack, I think of a bunch of unrelated individuals like dogs getting together. Think of feral dogs, for example. Typically when they pack up, none of them are related to each other, and they're all running around doing bad things, like running cattle or something. Coyotes are territorial. If the coyotes are not part of their family group, they're going to keep the rest of them out. So when they move, and they will move together in groups, they're moving with their families. So for coyotes, rather than use packs, I like to say family groups. If you ever see more than one together, that's suggesting you're seeing an adult with either its mate or with its offspring. And they will move together, and the adults will teach the young how to hunt together, but they're not necessarily packing up like we would think of dogs doing. Coy dogs and coy wolves is another one. A coy dog is when a coyote and a dog breed with each other, Coy dogs have been recorded out west. They have not been recorded in Florida. And it's difficult to get a coy dog or to have a coyote and dog breed with each other. Typically, we only see that happening when there's not another coyote to breed with, and that doesn't seem to be an issue here. Also, coyotes' breeding cycles don't link up with dogs. Coyotes breed once in the winter. Dogs typically breed in the spring and in the fall. Because their cycles don't link, it can be difficult for the two of them to interbreed with one another. If they do interbreed with each other and they have a coy dog offspring, it's sterile. Like, I always get this confused. A horse and a mule make a donkey, or do I have that backwards? And anyway, it's sterile. It's a sterile individual. A coy wolf is when you have a coyote and a wolf breed with each other. There's a lot of debate in the scientific community about whether coy wolves actually exist. This is going to depend on who you ask. There's a lot of studies going on, especially along the eastern seaboard, all the way up to New England, trying to answer that question. Do coy wolves exist? I can tell you, though, there's no evidence of coy wolves in Florida, primarily because there's no wolves for them here to breed with. Disease is another one. Now, I don't want to say that coyotes don't carry any diseases, because that's not true. They certainly carry diseases. What I have this on here for is because some folks, when they see coyotes out during the daylight, they'll automatically say, oh my gosh, that animal's got to be diseased, and that's not the case. Coyotes will come out during the daylight hours if they've got young to feed, or if they're not being consistently pressured by people. Now that is to say they can carry the same diseases that you're vaccinating your dogs for. So they can carry rabies, they can carry distemper, they can get mange, they can get heartworm and tapeworms and all those other parasites. So you certainly wouldn't want to let your dog interact with a coyote. But not every coyote that's out during the day is diseased. And finally, Hollywood and Wile E. Coyote always make us think that coyotes are up to no good, but they're really just trying to survive, just like any other wild animal is. One other ugly aspect about coyotes is depredation of livestock. I'm going to guess you guys don't have a lot of livestock out here, so I'm going to gloss over this. But for some smaller operations, electric fencing or paddocks or using guard animals are good ways to keep livestock depredation at bay. And this too, just like I mentioned, sea turtle and shorebird depredation is learned. This is also a learned behavior. Not every coyote will go after livestock. The biggest thing that my staff and I talk to the public about coyotes is urban coyotes and pet loss. It is no secret that coyotes will take pets if given the opportunity. Anytime a cat is outside, it's open to predation. And that's not just coyotes. Coyotes are notorious for taking cats, but there's plenty of other predators that will take cats if given the opportunity, like alligators, like bobcats. If you're in bear country or panther country, they'll take cats too. Even large raptors can take large cats. Coyotes get a little bit more notoriety than those other species do, but the best way to protect cats from predation from coyotes and other wildlife is simply keeping them indoors. Anytime they're outside, they're open to some bad things happening, including being predated by coyotes. Small dogs are typically taken by coyotes when they're not on a leash, when they're not with a person, and when they're not in a well-fenced yard. Typically when they take small dogs, they're under 20 pounds or so. A lot of times when we hear small dogs being taken, it's first thing in the morning or late in the evening, where the homeowner or the pet owner allows the dog to go outside by itself and doesn't go out with it, and a coyote happens to be there and takes advantage of that opportunity. The best way to protect small dogs is to simply be outside with them when they're outside doing their business, or if you're walking, having them on a short leash. We suggest a 6-foot leash at max. Those retractable leashes where the little dog can go way out ahead of you are not good deterrents. And we have had coyotes take dogs off of leashes in that manner when they're way out stretched at the end of a retractable leash. Those trail camera photos I showed you a little while ago from Lithia, from Hillsborough County, we also got a cat on that trail camera, and that cat was there about 8 minutes before the coyote showed up. And the bobcat was there earlier that evening. So this just goes to show you that predators are here, they are around, and this is why it's so important to protect our pets from predators. And there's some, like I mentioned, there's some easy, simple steps we can take to prevent that from happening. Now, usually at this point, when I'm talking to the public, I'll get a question, well, what about me? Am I safe from coyotes? Attacks by coyotes on people are exceedingly rare. To put it into perspective, I've compared dog bites to coyote bites on this slide. So on average, between 1960 and 2006, there are on average about 3.5 people that are bitten by coyotes every year in the US and Canada. Most of those people have unfortunately been doing something they shouldn't be doing, or they've been the victim of someone else doing something they shouldn't be doing, like feeding the coyote or getting between the coyote and its food. Between 1960 and 2006, 2 people were killed by coyotes in the US and Canada. One of them was a child. One was a toddler in California in the 1980s. From articles I have read, there was a family directly hand-feeding those coyotes. We know coyotes can get aggressive when they've been fed. Same thing with alligators and with bears and with raccoons. Because we know coyotes can make that association between people and food and can lose their fear of humans, FWC has made it illegal to feed coyotes in this state. I think we passed that in 2014. So compare coyotes now, 3.5 attacks approximately per year in US and Canada. Compare that to dog bites. There's more than 1,000 emergency room visits in this country every day from dog bites. There's more than 5 million cases a year that require medical treatment. And 176 people have been killed by dogs in the US and Canada between 2010 and 2014. Statistically, your chances of being bitten by a coyote are very, very low. I think when I looked at the stats a couple of months ago, think you're more likely to be hit by lightning or to have a vending machine fall on you than you are to be bitten by a coyote. So it's a very low likelihood to be bitten by coyotes, and we know the reasons why. There's almost always a food attractant that's driving it. So by now you might be asking yourself, well, can't we just get rid of them? Can't all the coyotes go away? Technically on an island, yeah, you could get rid of them, but it's only a matter of time before they come back. So, but for that reason, I'm going to say no. It's really impossible to get rid of coyotes completely. The reasons why is because they're territorial, they have high replacement, they are adaptable, they can eat almost anything. And one thing I didn't mention earlier is eradication efforts for coyotes in other states have failed dramatically. There has been removal programs, poisoning programs, shooting coyotes out of helicopter programs out west for decades, and hasn't made a dent in the populations. And in fact, remember, coyotes have expanded their range to every state in the continental U.S., and they've been persecuted just as much as wolves have. That goes to show you how adaptable and how well they can survive. And personally, I can't think of another mid-sized mammal that has done this, that has been persecuted by humans and expanded its range to every state in the continental U.S. One other factor with coyotes that make them interesting is their reproduction. If they are consistently pressured in one area, they can ramp up their reproduction and increase their output of pups per year. So let me give an example. Let's say all the coyotes north of us on Holmes Beach are wiped out. They're gone. Something happens. Disease, trapper comes in, something happens, they're gone. The coyotes in Longboat Key can react to that. All of a sudden, hey, there's a lot more food up there to support more coyotes, and there's more territory. I can have more kids, and they'll start increasing their reproductive output. This is why eradication efforts around the country for them have failed. They prove to be inefficient, ineffective, and very expensive. So what if you have one nuisance coyote, though? What if you have one coyote that's taking cats or getting into garbage? Can you remove that nuisance individual? And the answer is yes. On your property as a landowner, you have the right to remove nuisance coyotes on your property. So how do you do that? What does that mean? The first way you would do that, if you were to call a trapper or try to catch the coyote yourself, the first method to try would be a live trap or a cage trap. It's a box-style trap, kind of looks like this. Rhonda, can you grab that trap for me? We brought a trap that looks like this. She's going to grab it real quick. I want to point out the trap that Rhonda's bringing in is way too small to catch a coyote. You would need to upscale it. There are traps big enough to catch coyotes. But I can tell you from experience talking to trappers, good luck catching a coyote in one of these. This is primarily a really bad way to catch coyotes because they know better. They're smart enough to avoid this type of trap. Even if live bait is used, they'll typically avoid this style trap, whether it's camouflaged or not. From the professional trappers I've talked to around the state, the only time they've caught a coyote in that style trap has been a really young coyote that doesn't know better, or a diseased, sick animal that's desperate. And that's typically not your problem animal. Usually your problem animal is an adult, and they're going to avoid that at all costs. The next style trap that you could use as a snare, this is a device that's typically made out of airline cable. Thank you. It's typically made out of airline cable like this. So it's a cable restraint that's designed to catch the animal, usually around the neck or around the foot. For coyotes, it's usually around the neck. So this is a hard trap to catch something in. You just can't put this in your backyard and hope he walks through it. This needs to go through a pinch, fence line, hedgerow, somewhere where the animal's moving through completely. The idea is when the coyote walks through it and sticks his head through, it's going to pull and stop and hold the coyote there. This particular snare, the more you pull, the more it cinches. So the longer the animal struggles, the tighter it's going to get. Animals can asphyxiate in this in about 3 minutes. And the really negative thing about snares is it doesn't discriminate. Anything that gets into it, is going to get caught. So domestic dog, a cat, a deer, a skunk, a bobcat, doesn't matter. Whatever gets into this is probably not going to make it. Because of that, because it can catch so many different species, this is typically not a popular option to use in an urban or a public area. The third option is a steel trap or a foothold. This it kind of looks like this. This is a pretty large one for a coyote. So this style trap is padded, and it's designed to catch the animal around the foot. So the animal puts its foot there, and this grabs and holds along the foot. This one's also kind of a hard one. How do you make the coyote put his foot in such a small space? This one takes some finesse in order to work and get correct. This one also will catch non-target species. So anything that puts its foot in here is going to get caught. The benefit to this is if you catch it around his foot, it's not going to asphyxiate like it would in a snare. You have an option of letting the animal out. This style trap, though, because it can catch non-target species, is not a legal trap to use in Florida without a permit from FWC. And we typically don't issue traps or permits for traps like this in urban areas because of the propensity, especially to catch domestic animals. So these are typically your options for catching a coyote, and what I wanted to point out with you with this, it's really hard to catch a coyote. Even for professional trappers, it's very difficult to catch them. This is one of the most difficult species to capture because of how intelligent and how smart they are. FWC suggests trying to limit problems with coyotes before you get here because it's going to be really tough for a professional trapper to catch a coyote. And even if they are successful at catching a coyote, it's only a matter of time before another one comes in and takes that animal's place. So we have some suggestions before you get to trapping to try to help deal with coyotes that you have in your area.
You want to hold questions till later?
Yes, please. I'm almost done. So one of the suggestions we have, and you probably guessed this before I even had to say it, is don't feed them. Don't feed coyotes, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally. Anything that can attract a raccoon, a dog, or a cat can attract a coyote. So what you want to do to secure attractants or to prevent feeding coyotes is secure your garbage in a structure and put it out on the curb a morning of trash day. Putting it out on the curb in a bag like this is easy pickings for coyotes and raccoons and other species. You want to clean up fallen fruit, pet food, and bird seed, and as you've seen, coyotes will eat pet food if it's out left for them, so you want to make sure you pick all those up. If you absolutely must feed your animal outside, pick up the bowl and the food immediately after they're fed. You want to keep cats indoors. Again, this is the only way to keep cats safe from predation. If they're indoors, there's really no risk of predation, but anytime they're outside, that risk increases exponentially, and they are at risk from being taken by coyotes and other predators. And you want to keep dogs on a leash, a short leash, 6 foot max, in a well-fenced yard, and you want to be outside with your dog. Even if it's a large dog, and trust me, coyotes aren't going to want to take on a pit or a Rottweiler or a German Shepherd, but we know some of those larger dogs off leash, if they come up on a den of a coyote, the coyotes are going to defend it. So it's best to keep dogs on a short leash to help prevent them from entangling with coyotes. One other thing you can do to prevent problems with coyotes is to haze them. So this is getting after them and letting them know that, you know what, they're really not welcome hanging out in your driveway, and they're not welcome in your backyard. This is making the coyotes yield to you and giving them some human dominance. You can throw rocks at them, you can yell at them, you can use an air horn, you can use a coyote shaker. We've got one outside, pretty much just a soda can with pebbles in it. You could use a water pistol or firecrackers or whatever you need to do to get that animal's attention. And I'll talk about bear spray here in just a moment. Now, some coyotes, if they've never been hazed before, or if they're in a really urban environment and they're being exposed to a lot of noises like brakes and cars backfiring and planes overhead and train whistles, they might be a little harder to haze. When you start hazing, they might just stand there and look at you like you're crazy. Like, I don't get it. What's happening here? Keep going. Keep going until you make that animal move from you. And they should yield to you. If they don't move, step it up. Step up your hazing until that animal gets it. It needs to get out of your way and yield to you. Sometimes they'll immediately bolt and turn away and gone in the bushes, and that's the reaction you want. Sometimes they'll trot away and they'll stop and they'll turn around and they'll look at you again. Really? Like, this is what's happening to me right now? You're really going to haze me? Keep going until you can no longer see the animal. If you stop hazing when it turns around, it starts to learn, oh, okay, all I got to do is turn around, that crazy person's going to stop yelling at me. Awesome. Keep going until you can no longer see the animal. And like I mentioned, they're going to be a little tough to haze if they've never been hazed before. They may also be a little tougher to haze if they're around a den. If they've got a den close by, they're going to be a little less resistant to give up and back away from it. The one option here I wanted to talk about briefly is bear spray. I would not use bear spray unless I had a coyote coming up to me. If I had a coyote approaching me, maybe 15 feet or less, that's going to be a good time to use bear spray. And we would prefer bear spray over mace. Mace comes out in a little tiny stream, and you got to be good with your aim. Bear spray comes out in a fog, and it comes out about 15 feet ahead of you. So as soon as the coyote hits that fog with that capsaicin pepper from the bear spray, it interrupts the respiratory system to where he can't breathe any longer, and he's got to move and get out of there. It's a pretty effective deterrent, but you wouldn't want to deploy it unless that coyote was close to you. You'd also want to be cognizant of which way the wind was blowing. It can affect you, and it can affect your dog too. So some facts. I'm going to kind of summarize and wrap this up and leave you with some facts. Adult coyotes weigh between 25 and 40 pounds. They occur in every state, nearly every large city in the U.S. They're in Orlando and Miami. They've been recorded in New York City. They've been recorded in Dallas and in Denver and Los Angeles. If they can live there, they can live here too. Attacks by coyotes on humans are exceedingly rare. Coyotes will kill cats and small dogs if given the opportunity. And they can carry rabies just like any other mammal, but that's also pretty rare for coyotes. And so some advice. Don't feed them, and we talked about that. And remember, it's illegal to feed coyotes in Florida, and I'll tell you who to report that to in just a second. Prevent access to garbage and pet food. Keep cats indoors. Have small dogs on a short leash or in a well-fenced yard. Follow those hazing recommendations to consistently frighten coyotes away. And in the unlikely event a coyote were to approach you, you'd want to lift your dog or your small child up off the ground and be prepared to defend yourself. You would not want to run. If you run, a coyote's instinct is to give chase, just like a dog's instinct is. You wouldn't want to run, but you'd want to be prepared to defend yourself. And remember, they're about the size of a mid-sized dog. You can do what it takes to get them to leave you and get them to yield to you. So who should you call if you have a problem with a coyote in Florida? You can call us. Rhonda and I work out of the Lakeland office, and that's the number at the Southwest Regional Office. You're welcome to give us a call. We're talking to folks every day about coyotes. If you want to report a violation, such as someone feeding a coyote, you can do that anonymously, and you can call the Wildlife Alert Hotline there on your screen, and that number is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The FWC does not come out and remove nuisance coyotes, but if it gets to the point where you think that coyote needs to be removed, we'll refer you to the trapper list that's on our website. So, which ones are they? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they ugly? That's kind of up to you to decide, but they are trying to live with us, and they're proving they're going to live with us whether we like it or not. And there's some steps, those simple steps I discussed earlier, some little things we can do to prevent problems with coyotes from starting. And that is the end of my presentation. As Tom mentioned earlier, we're going to be out at the tables discussing these topics or any other topic you might have. Thank you very much.
Real quick, again, thank you. We're going to be here for probably the next hour answering questions right out here. I might stand in here for a few minutes. We're going to give Angelina, the biologist, just a quick chance to go get set up. Again, if you have questions, let us know. There's a way to send comments in. Telephone numbers are there. Appreciate the space very much. Tom, you want to say a few words, and when Tom's done, we'll go right. We're just right out here where you guys were. You can find us.
Sure. I'll just be real quick. I want to say again, thank you to FWC for coming out. We hosted this event today, so you have an opportunity to hear from them. They're going to be be here. You can ask them questions and follow up directly. If for some reason you want a copy of what was presented, we videotaped the session today, and we have a copy of the PowerPoint, so we're going to post that on our website as well. So thank you to FWC, and thank you guys for coming. Or so, and then whatever I've learned in the last month or so.
Okay. I guess this is the first incident of a coyote on Longboat Key?
I've heard that, but someone who's been here longer can help answer that.
About 4 years ago, we had a report on the south end near Sands Point. 2 or 3 reports in about 2 weeks.
Yeah,
So
I did actually see that myself, okay, and somebody had to tell me what it was. But my interest in this is that we have a tremendous amount of wildlife on the island right now that we've introduced, or we haven't introduced, but somehow this predator came upon us, okay? And it's thriving out here, perhaps raccoons, perhaps rats, mice, etc., and so forth. But what's next? Should we be friendly to it? What's the town's position? Are we just going to let this exist and just deal with the consequences? Or are we going to do anything now?
And Angelina's presentation was pretty specific on that. I think she did a great job telling us what we ought to do, and that is the hazing portion of it, the idea of not baiting it with food. They're the experts over there on that.
Well, you know, I've got I don't mean to be too rough on this, but, you know, if you had something that was a nuisance, okay, and there's a potential for something to go wrong. Let's say, for example, that you had someone that left the chart house in a car and drove drunk down Gulf of Mexico Drive every night, but he was a nice guy, okay? He does a lot of good things and so forth. You probably wouldn't put up with that. And so we have now this animal that does some good things and so forth. He has the high potential to do some very bad things to the wildlife here. And I have a vested interest, like many of us who live here, in the wildlife of the island. And so, are we going to let the situation just continue to go until something bad happens, or are we going to be proactive?
And I'll try to start, and anyone can jump in, because I'm trying to figure this out as well, and we're all concerned about the coyote sightings and how visible the coyote is, and what does that mean? We've reached out to FWC, we reached out to the county's animal control and others, and I know, for instance, the animal control, they're not going to respond out here, and unless it was injured or diseased, obviously. If it's in its natural good health, they're not going to provide any support or assistance. You've heard from the FWC on what their advice to the town is the same advice it is to the residents, is that they're a natural part of the environment, and you need to be aware of that, and there's certain things you need to do, just like with others like alligators, etc. How do you live with those types of things in your community? We've checked with trappers. We've looked at that option, and we've heard the same thing both from trappers and FWC, that has a lot of complications with it. You're likely to trap and injure or kill domestic animals, cats and dogs, and there's not an easy way to trap a coyote. And if you do, expect that you'll have another one right behind it and another one right behind that. So we're going through the same exercise you are, and are struggling with how do we make sure we do the right thing.
I think you have a golden opportunity, and I don't mean to hog the microphone, but I think you have a golden opportunity here that you could let slip by, okay? And it's not, trapping isn't the only thing. You could take the animal out, okay?
Well, let me just interrupt you. The zoos are shooting all the time and not euthanizing, but putting the animal out and they're taking away.
Yeah.
We have trained police on this island that know how to use a rifle. They've spotted these animals.
Yeah.
Why couldn't that be another option? She didn't mention that in her, ways to trap. To me, that is a very straightforward method.
And you don't have
And
to
you
use,
wouldn't
and you
kill
don't
the
have
animal.
to, you can take them out, you can take them out
That's what I'm trying
with
to
a tranquilizer, or you can take it out with an air gun. You don't actually need a ballistic weapon.
Help with the
Could you please?
chemical mobilization part.
So chemical mobilization is kind of the technical term for darting an animal. And you're right, zoos and facilities do that a lot, but they also have the animal contained, in a small area where it can't escape or it can't leave. In order to get close enough to a coyote to dart it with a dart rifle, you've got to get about 25 yards from it, which is pretty close. And most of the time, coyotes won't let you get that close. But let's say you get close and you fire the dart and you hit the coyote. It doesn't immediately fall to the ground and go to sleep. It depends on the amount of drug that's in the dart. It depends on where you hit the animal. It depends on if you did your math right. Did you give enough drugs for the weight of the animal? That's tough, not knowing the weight of the animal, the exact weight. If you make a good hit, it's going to take the animal about 10 minutes to fall asleep. And I can guarantee you he's not just going to stand there. He's going to bolt. He's going to take off with a dart, and particularly in his rear. Now you've got a coyote that's immobilized, and now you got to find him. How do you do that? What if he runs in the road and gets hit by a car in the process? What if he runs out to the Gulf and drowns as the mobilization as the chemical mobilization takes place? What if you miss? What if you miss and your dart goes off in the palmettos and you can't find it, and you've got a dart loaded with drugs in it? There's a lot of variables that come into darting. And then once you have the animal in hand, let's say everything goes great and smoothly and you have the animal, what do you do with it? And that's an option, or that's a decision that either the city or the landowner would need to make. FWC would suggest euthanizing it. Relocating a coyote is pretty steep to meet the legal requirements to relocate. You need to be in the same county of capture on 40 contiguous acres with landowner's permission. And I don't know of a private landowner that will give permission to allow you to relocate a coyote there. Plus, relocating coyotes is a way to transfer disease. So if the coyote was diseased here on Longboat, you go take it somewhere else, you might be spreading disease. You also learn today that they're territorial. So if you take one off Longboat, you go let him go somewhere else, he's going to try to come back to Longboat because that's where his territory is. He probably won't make it. He probably will be hit by a car or have something else happen to him on his way. You can almost be guaranteed, too, wherever you let him go, there's another coyote there already that's established. So if you were to go through all that, we would suggest euthanizing the coyote rather than relocating it. I can tell you from experience, darting coyotes, free-range darting, while they're not in a trap, is very, very difficult. Even for FWC, for one of the animals that we dart, I don't want to say regularly, but that we have darted are bears, and we do that if there's no other option. We would rather do anything else than dart that bear or dart a coyote because of just how risky it is. Does that help? Does that answer? Does that help at all?
Well, it's tough.
You know, I
It's
saw
very
that. I was walking, I have a small dog, 17 years old, very valuable dog. And that coyote was maybe here to that wall from me, and it just laid there. Now, it was very docile, and actually I had my dog on a leash, and the dog probably would have gone after it faster. But it still is a vicious animal, and I have hunted them out west. They're very wily. They didn't wear wily coyote for nothing. But it still will take that little dog of mine, or my neighbor's cat or dog, or so I believe that this gentleman should be removed from the islands, one way or another.
So I can respect that, especially if you have a problem animal, try to target that problem animal and getting it off the island.
Well, I didn't say that this animal was, we just said it was there.
Sure,
And
not
we've seen it
extremely
3 times on Jungle Queen Way in
Sure.
one day.
And they are habitual. They will show up in the same areas around the same amount of time. I think we would encourage, if you have a problem animal, to remove that problem animal. But there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's no way to completely eradicate it. It's just going to be one after the other after the other. It'll end up being the same.
Rufus would become a problem. I have one in the body that is not afraid of people, and I've had the police come out and see this animal, I can walk towards the animal, haze, do whatever I want to do. It does nothing. And this has happened on more than one occasion. And I was one that was chased by this animal, and I believe it's the same coyote. I'm afraid to go outside. It does not care about me. It does not. So is that a problem animal at this point? And I believe it is just one. I saw him 2 days ago over off Harborside Drive, hazed, did whatever. He just looks at me, whatever. So is that a problem animal?
The agency's definition of nuisance is an animal that is about to cause or has caused property damage, is an annoyance in, under, or upon a building, or is a threat to public safety. So if a landowner feels that a coyote or raccoon is, or other wildlife, and there's some caveats to that, I'm just being really general. If the landowner feels a coyote, or for example, meets that definition, they can remove that animal as a nuisance on their property. Problem is that coyotes are really difficult to remove. That's the issue.
I've been Target at night. I have 2 small dogs which need to be walked. This animal already knows where I'm at. I have a neighbor that lives down the street with 2 small dogs. She's also encountered the coyote. I'm a target. I'm tired. I'm scared to go out at night. I have my mace. I have my flashlight. I mean, it's terrible.
You have the option to trap and remove. That's an option that the landowner or the city has. You have that option right now. It's just going to be very challenging to capture that animal.
Do we know if it's just one?
Yeah, that's
Have we
Isn't that
identified only one?
responsibility of the Longboat Key?
So Longboat Key
We paid it that.
Longboat Key has given me a bunch of photos that I'm going to review. I can try to review individual photos and see if there are more than one coyote. Knowing the island, where Susan, you said 11 miles in length, so you could have 2 family groups here. It will be difficult, though. I can tell you it's going to be difficult for me at best to differentiate coyotes without something that's marked on them, or one has a tear in its ear. That would make it easier. It'll be very challenging to have a count without marking individual animals. If there's any good news, because you're on an island, there's only so many coyotes this island will support. There's only so much territory, and there's only so much food. That's the biological limiting factor. Your coyotes aren't going to go overpopulation, for example, because there's not enough space for them to do that. If there's not enough territory or not enough food, one or two things are going to happen. They're either going to die or they're going to leave. That's the only option. And you don't have a lot of space here, so that's one of the biggest limiting factors for coyotes living on islands.
I think one of the, just jump into this, one of the things that I think I'm hearing some of the people say here are that we are concerned. At this point, coyotes seem to show up in the past 6 months or a year, I guess it is, at this point. If we give them an opportunity, they will reproduce until they get to a certain density that they can't hold the island. I am not going to trust, as a doctor, I am not going to trust that that coyote is not diseased as opposed to being diseased. As far as I'm concerned, that coyote that I run across has a high propensity of having rabies. I do not need to have it hit me, scratch me, or take out my little puppy, which is 8 pounds that I'm walking, because it may have rabies. My feeling is, at this point, I know they're hard, and your ideal is to conserve the natural habitat. Our ideal is, how can we take them off the island? I'm thinking in terms of, my wife will not walk the dog at night. I go out, and I guess I'm going to have to arm myself. It's the only thing I can do, in case that one animal I come across decides to go after me and my dog because it has rabies, and it's out of the ordinary thing. I'm going to have to be armed. I don't know what else to do.
If it helps at all, there's only been, to my knowledge, one coyote that's been confirmed with Florida rabies, and that was back in 2012 on the East Coast. So any mammal can carry rabies. Coyotes are certainly susceptible to that. For folks that aren't familiar, when an animal starts showing symptoms of having rabies, it's typically dead within about 10 days. And they show some pretty dramatic symptoms. They will salivate at the mouth. Part of what happens with rabies is the throat closes, so they can't swallow anymore. So they'll start to salivate at the mouth. They'll stagger like they're intoxicated. They'll appear emaciated. Sometimes they'll attack inanimate objects like a stop sign or a tree. Those are all signs and symptoms of rabies. It's also a good sign of distemper. Distemper symptoms in coyotes look very similar to rabies symptoms. There's no way to differentiate which disease it is without having that animal, after it's dead, sending its brain off for laboratory testing. Absolutely, a coyote can get rabies. So can a raccoon, so can a dog, so can
We have a lot of
anything.
raccoons here as is, and there's a high chance that they have it. And of
Right.
course, if the coyotes are feasting on a raccoon, and whether they get scratched or ingest the blood, however, or get scratched in the struggle, we now have to pass from one to the other.
Absolutely.
So
That's
we had this in Maryland, and we had to literally have hunts going out and trappings because we had so much of this going on with particularly the raccoons.
So a couple quick things. For obvious reasons, we want you to be able to protect yourself. We've talked about bear spray and hazing. And we are not going to stand up here and say, carry a firearm and discharge a firearm in a neighborhood. That's a bad idea for many, many, many
I don't know
reasons.
what, but it's
Yeah.
applicable.
The other thing is just, and I hear frustration. We've done these meetings before, and I understand where you're coming from. And if you've lost your pet, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm a pet owner myself. But what we're trying to do is present options to both you and the city kind of at the same time. So to be clear, we have rules against feeding coyotes. We have rules about the capture and release of coyotes that Angeline was talking about. But as either a town, a neighborhood organization, concerned citizens, you can elect to remove those coyotes. We've given you some science that says you can try that and there can be some success in that. You may not eradicate, they may come back, but you may be able to control a particularly worrisome coyote in a particular area. So I know there's some frustration, but there are some options that can be managed, and we can, I think that's, I'm looking at an answer, but manage is one term that I think we've come to rather than eradication. I will follow that up and repeat what was said though. If there are attractants out, okay, pet food, grills, trash, whatever those different things are, even if it's trash day and the trash is put out the night before in a plastic bag, it's going to be very difficult to manage those animals and raccoons and all those critters because they know where the food source is and it's much easier than hunting a friend. So just some thoughts. I think she was waiting for.
There's one thing that's not been mentioned, and it really concerns me. Young children. I have a young grandchild. I hope we don't get to the point where our children cannot be out of doors without being supervised. Children are, no matter how bright they are, how you instruct them, you don't know if they're going to do what you tell them to do. I think that that's something that really has to be considered. There are a growing amount of young children on the island. I haven't heard any discussion of that at all. I'm also concerned that if you have an outdoor cat now, it's got to become an indoor cat. I hope that this is only the beginning of the discussion and not the end, that this is a start and that we get someplace from here, because I think the public has to be accommodated. We can't just think of accommodating the animals. Okay?
That's good.
Like this lady just said, I have a small dog, as I said earlier, but I have an invisible fence. My dog wants to be outside, she just doesn't. And she doesn't go outside of her fence unless I take her outside the fence. The coyote can come inside the fence and outside the fence, and my dog will just be there because.
Let me just,
I think-
I want to just kind of respond, 'cause I think that was a good point. I think from the town's perspective, this is a relatively new phenomenon, at least in the near term, over the last few years. And we're in that, I think Susan used the word earlier, fact-finding mode. We're trying to understand what our options are and what we should be doing both as a town and as the community and as homeowner associations, as all of us. And the purpose of this today was not to wait too much longer, and they've offered to come out and talk to all of us about coyotes and things that we might need to be aware of and pros and cons and strategies and all of those things. So we're trying to figure that out as well, but we didn't want to wait and have this information session until all the options were clear. We're learning as we go as well at what choices the town might have, and we hope you're learning too. In the meantime, fortunately, we haven't had a serious interaction with a coyote, and hopefully we won't. And we're trying to figure out what those options are. We met weeks and weeks ago with trappers and got very negative feedback to say the odds of us catching that animal are very, very low, and we have a high probability to injure others. And so we're looking at what all those different options are. And this is just, like I think was mentioned, one of the steps in the process for us to kind of learn more about what other communities are doing, what the FWC recommends, et cetera.
May I make a statement that I think this is what I'm hearing, excuse me, from everyone. We have never been a habitat for coyotes. Suddenly, in the past month or so, we've had sightings that we shouldn't become their habitat.
Exactly.
We should get them off the island before they have a baby or 6 or 12. If we become so familiar to them, they're going to stay, and we don't want to multiply the population.
I think
that's what I'm hearing.
the thing about the island, this probably island, it's not anti-wildlife friendly. They probably donate more money as a population toward wildlife efforts and things than most populations in the entire country. Okay? But the fact that we are an island, it provides a certain security to things like this. And I guess the question is, why do we need to allow them to be in a habitat and go through some of the things you said and try this and try that? I don't know if our swans, our royal swans, are they still around? I mean, we have weird things in this island, like royal swans that go all the way back to royal history. And we think they're neat. Anyone else would laugh at that. But I mean, if the coyotes got that, there'd be a lot of people upset, a little bit like Snooty. All I'm trying to say is, I think the majority of people on the island really don't want to accommodate them, as she said. And we prefer not to have it here. And it's a little bit like the snakes. How long is it going to take before they are out of control? And I think if they are removed from the island, they won't come back as quickly as they would in some of the other areas because we are an island. It took them a while to get out here as it is, right? I mean, and you said sightings maybe 4 years ago, but I don't think there's a history of them out here. What evidence is that they are killing the raccoons? Do they leave a carcass behind? How do we know they are killing raccoons here? That would be the only positive thing.
Well, so I heard like 4 or 5 different things
right
there, but to be clear, we try to present the entirety of wildlife.
Exactly.
And fittingly, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think.
Right.
And maybe at the point of some repetition, we want to not stand in the way. If the island decides that they want to engage in a campaign of trapping, significant hazing, removal, euthanasia, the state has said, yes, you can pursue that, with the exception of poison use, not but and we have ways to issue permits if you decide to do that. The other part of this presentation, though, is to just be upfront and say those are difficult things to do, and if those are done at whatever cost, whatever resource, whomever is involved, if the attractants are not secured, it's going to be very difficult to see long-term success. As much as I can't even tell you that within a month of some proclamation of eradication of coyotes, if that's even possible, they could be right back. They're that pervasive. So, and it could be longer than a month, it could be less, I don't know. So, there's ways that you can go about, and we've listed the majority of those ways here, trapping being a big one. So we are trying to present the whole picture, and that's kind of our job today. I think you had a question. You had a second question too. Go ahead.
One of the things I wanted to add to that, you mentioned, do we have to have them here? As Tom mentioned, you can remove them. But I would suggest before you start that, check with your other partners on some of the other islands here. Sanibel, Pativa, Casparilla, Hairberry are some of the ones I can think of off the top of my head. They've all been here. They've been right where you are, they've explored the options. I don't think any of them have gone to try a removal campaign, but if one of them has, they may have some suggestions for you. But I think that's going to be a uphill battle. I don't think we'll win it. Some of the other islands, especially on the east coast of the U.S., farther off Florida, or North Florida, have been here too. And they haven't been successful in eradication. So I think I mentioned in the top of the presentation, technically, yeah, you can get them all off the island because you're an island. But how long until they're back? And I know
It
they
took them
haven't
a long
been here,
time to get here.
but they're here now. and
Yeah,
that's-
but once they're gone, how long does it take them to go back?
That depends. It could be 6 days, 6 months, 6 years.
Okay.
But the fact that they are here, to me, suggests that in Bradenton and in Sarasota, they're pushing out. And so one thing I didn't mention is when the pups get old enough, they don't stay here. They go somewhere else. Mom and dad keep them out. They go find their own territory. So what's likely happened is your coyotes here on Longboat have been dispersing from Bradenton or from Sarasota. They may be at capacity, and that's why it's pushing out all the way to here. There's no way to tell how long it would take. If you were successful at removing them all, could be years, could be months, could be days.
But right now, if it's new to us, possibly the population is not dense yet, our goal would be to not only try to get them removed, but we may have to euthanize them so they don't have memory to come back onto the island. But they're not gonna, once you euthanize them, they can't tell the others in Sarasota, hey, come swim over here, there's good food. So we just can't pick them up and put them where somebody says you can license put them. They're like anything, a dog will do the same thing. They'll come back to the main area, their nesting area. So we have to decide, do we want to let it go to where we have 20 and 30 and 40, if that's going to be the density, and now try to get them as opposed to 2 or 3 at this point. We're coming on fall, they're going to breed, we got to do this before we get the spring.
For what it's worth, I don't think you'll ever have 20 or 30, 40 on this island. I don't think support it. I think you'll have 2 family groups that have pups every year. How many pups they have is dependent on how much food's here. And the more human food that's here, the more pups they can have. But again, those pups aren't going to stay. There's not enough territory for them. They're going to have to go somewhere else. And if they don't go somewhere else, they'll be driven out by the coyotes that are already existing. Like I said earlier, so one per, or maybe not one per, but a per could be on the island. You can't support 20 or 30, 40 coyotes. It's not biologically possible.
Well, they'll become more aggressive toward the pets on the leash as well.
Absolutely.
And
Right?
children
Not
are
They're
necessarily.
hungry, they're hungry.
It depends on the food source now. I'm sure Angeline talked about the range in rural areas versus an urban area and smaller. If the food source is available, that's what they're looking for. And I'm making this up, I'm not making it.
Right.
If a restaurant has a dumpster that's a mess, that's what they eat. They're good to go. And they'll go from there to there to there, and back and
Or
forth.
raccoons. If I asked, what do they do with the carcasses? Has anyone found raccoon carcasses around?
Yeah, absolutely.
What
Well,
do
not
they
so much
do?
with Longboat, but when a coyote takes a raccoon, they're going to consume most everything. The way we know they're consuming raccoons is through scat surveys. So this is biologists like me picking up poo and looking at what's in there. And gut content surveys, like I showed you earlier.
Right.
I don't recall
But I mean,
that.
do they leave the carcass behind then? And has anyone seen raccoon carcasses around?
Not
Do
that I
they
know
drag
of.
them in the woods? or-
Not that I know of here, but if coyote may not consume all of it, but think if you've got other scavengers here that are gonna come try to consume that carcass, like possums and skunks and vultures, it's probably not gonna last very long. Even when they take cats, there's not typically a whole lot left when they take cats. Raccoons are typically larger than cats. So I don't know if anyone's come across a raccoon carcass on Longboat, but I've heard more than once that there's a lot of raccoons here, and that could be what's sustaining them.
And rats,
And rats.
especially with a major demolition going on in one of the properties on the island. They've had a rat infestation problem for years, and the demolition of that property is an opportunity for these animals to come in and feed on that, because they have to go somewhere, the rats are going somewhere, so.
Well, coincidentally, some of the sightings have been on the
On the
beach
colony.
adjacent
I know.
to that
And the
property.
timing, by the way, is exactly when that began. And I'm not saying that's the cause, but I'm saying when you provide a ready food source for any kind of animal who's going to feed on it, we're providing a buffet on the island for these animals. Now, that's not necessarily bad, and I do understand the fear involved with animals and so forth. But in terms of the environment, they could be benefiting the island in many ways to get rid of the rats who also eat birds' nests, who also dig into eggs and so forth on the beach. You have to think about a balance, and we as humans have moved into a natural setting and provided ourselves with our own homes. But we forget sometimes that this was home to many animals before we got here.
And there are more people here, more density, less food, less animals to breed, less population.
Did the town, before they started the demolition of the colony, did they have them go in and try to eradicate as much of the rats as possible?
And the contractor was required to have an exterminator go through prior to demolition and also periodically be part of that process.
Just so we could say we're killing at least a reasonable amount of the population.
Because that was a big concern of the neighboring condos as well, and so that was part of the town hired a contractor to do an emergency demo of that property because of the conditions of the building.
Yes.
And that's usually we don't demo private property, but it's something because of the conditions of those buildings was authorized, but there was a provision in there that required an extermination process prior to demolition and a monitoring during demolition. Doesn't mean you capture them all, but.
No, of course.
What would the next step be for the town? Would we take it like a town vote or a Longboat wide vote and find out what the people would like to do and then based on what you had to say and taking those things into consideration versus the wishes of the town, then go ahead with a project to either eradicate or learn to live with them?
Typically, whether it's a coyote issue or not, the town would do its research and understand what its options are, and then would then look forward to taking advantage of one or two strategies to deal with the issue, and then we would keep the commission involved. If we needed commission approval, we'd go to the commission and ask for their support. But we're right now in a fact-gathering phase, and today is one of those.
I just hope that it wouldn't all be swayed by the presentation. As I said, we love wildlife in a sense. But I just hope we would get mass input from the people who live here and get their opinions, what they would like. And not say, well, it's something we have to live with.
What I've been hearing from my neighbors here on the island, do we want to become a breeding ground for coyotes? So we can let them get off the island to our neighbors in Breakout, Sarasota, or one of the other islands?
They're already there, but you're right. No, you're right. You don't want to be a breeder. Absolutely.
Can I just say, I come from London, and we've had the stories of foxes going to homes in the summer days when the back doors are open. You know, if you eradicate the coyotes, they're just not. They're not. There's always going to be something else out there. Then you might get raccoons that are fierce, and there was a lady bit at the Jonah Ramsey Park, I think. So we're going to kill all the raccoons. Are we going to move all of? Where do you stop? Where do you stop?
Well, you try to start it before it gets out of control, like the snakes in the Everglades. Now's the time to do something. No.
Species, are they, to the area?
You talked about a coyote. My experience has been that one coyote will run away from you, but when they run in the pack, 2 or 3 together, they get a little aggressive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
And they will ambush. We have a lot of vegetation in Longboat. It's very difficult to walk your dog down the sidewalk without having vast amounts of vegetation. And the stories that I have read, they will sit on the side, and you can't see them, and they will come out and attack. And that's happened on more than one occasion, according to my research, with dogs on leashes, short leashes. So, what am I supposed to do?
So what?
In the middle of the road?
Let me kind of address those. So, so coyotes typically hunt singly by themselves, but they can hunt with others. And typically, if you're seeing more than one, you're seeing again the adult male and female together, a breeding pair, or with their young Typically, the way they give chase or they take their prey is by short chase, ambush. They can run a long way, like dogs, you know, they're endurance runners, but they're going to run and try to grab the animal. That's the typical way they're going to do it if they're going to give chase to something. I can tell you I live in a neighborhood with coyotes. I do exactly what I suggested to you all today. I take bear spray with me. I have my dog on a short 6-foot leash with me. I'm not going to change my behavior because there's coyotes living here. They're going to change to me. I have not had an encounter with one, but I know what to do. I feel comfortable hazing, and that's kind of what I've tried to give to you all today. The absolute worst thing, and we discussed it earlier, is running from them because they're going to give chase. It's the instinctual response. If I had a small dog, I would have it right there with me on a short leash. There's only been a few cases that I'm aware of a coyote taking a dog off of the leash, and that's the small dog off of the leash. And that's worrisome because if you, again, think of how big a coyote is. It's about 27 pounds. That animal should not be comfortable walking up to someone like me, standing a little over 5 feet tall. It should not be comfortable. That's a risk.